Welcome, everybody. Welcome to our internet social media telecast. We are going to be discussing tonight the human cost of profits during the COVID-19 crisis. We will have a number of people here. I will be the moderator of this event. For Latino is hosting this event tonight. For Latino is a national Latino civil rights organization within 28 states across the country. For Latino is a nonprofit organization. I am the national vice president, and we will have the national president, Daryl Morin, on this. We will be, after we're going to have through the list, we're going to have our national president, Daryl Morin. We will also have a statement made, if possible, from a slaughterhouse worker, if we can get them on the line. We'll have Brent Newell, civil rights attorney with Public Justice. We will also have Mike Carberry with the Boycott Big Meat campaign, and then we will have question and answers. So right now, I'm going to hand this over to Daryl Morin, our national president for For Latino.
Thank you so much for opening us up tonight. I want to take a quick moment to thank everyone for taking time out of your busy schedules. We know it's such a trying time for everyone right now. So really appreciate you making the time. Tonight, our webcast is going to focus on the human cost of profits for mega meat processors during the COVID-19 pandemic. Tonight, we'll be discussing and sharing information on the issue of human dignity and worker rights during the pandemic. So before we start the presentation, let me just say on behalf of our board of directors and our membership that I want to make an important point that all work is honorable and all work is dignified. Whether you work in the C-suite or on the meatpacking floor, whether you're a surgeon or a landscaper, whether you work in the halls of Congress or you're sweeping the floors in school, you have the same and equal right to dignity, to workforce protections. Shortly here, we'll be reviewing the most recent report put out just within the last 4 or 5 days from the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. The report focuses solely on the impact COVID-19 has had on workers in meat and poultry processing plants. These are our brothers and sisters, our mothers and fathers, our neighbors and our friends. The CDC findings show that a disproportionate number of the workers are being infected and even dying, and these workers are predominantly workers of color. We strongly believe that the data proves beyond any question that this is the product of workplace discrimination. Discrimination that is not only an attack on their human dignity, but on their health, and sadly, in some cases, their lives. So tonight, we'll be reviewing those CDC findings, and we'll review the actions For Latino with our coalition partners are taking in our efforts to end this injustice. So we ask you to stay with us for the entire webcast, and then we ask you to join us so we together can send an unmistakable message to the mega meat processors and to Congress that all workers deserve the same workforce protections that they have. Thank you. So before we get started, also, let me just thank our partners over at Boycott Big Beef campaign. I appreciate them joining us and co-hosting this event. The Idaho Organization of Resource Councils, the Organic Consumers Association, Regeneration International, and Socially Responsible Agricultural Project, or SRAP. So proud to be standing shoulder to shoulder with these community leaders standing up for environmental and workplace justice. So Joe, why don't you take us through just a little bit of who For Latino is, and then we can jump right into that CDC report.
Okay. Well, again, For Latino is a national Latino civil rights organization. We were founded several years ago. We're within 28 states of the United States. We do civil rights. We also do education. We stay on top of legislation, not only on a federal level, but also on a state level. So with as many things going on right now, we are participating wherever we can. On the issue of meat packing and the impact of workers, we have been very involved on that. We're also involved with a civil rights lawsuit, which Brent Newell is one of the key leaders of part of that national coalition, taking on issues, taking on the rights of workers, Latinos and other immigrant workers within the meatpacking industry who have been treated unfairly So that is one of the key things. The Boycott Big Meat is where we're saying that workers are essential, not meat. So we have a boycott that's underway that just started yesterday across the country with many organizations. My Carberry is part of that coalition. Immigration is another thing. Of course, our Latino Civil Rights Organization is fighting hard for comprehensive immigration reform. Within the crisis happening in meatpacking, we're also calling for a legal status for all immigrant workers. When it comes to policing, we want an end to police brutality. We want ordinances that prevent racial profiling. So many things that we are involved in. We're very happy to have many young people part of our organization within those 28 states. So that pretty much covers it, Daryl, and I think we should go to the CDC report that you'll be providing.
Wonderful. We all know the difficult time that so many are having across the country. I think from a social justice perspective, we also know the inhumanity that's been occurring across our country, even before the pandemic. Last fall, For Latino was crucial in providing emergency support to a United States citizen who had acid thrown on him because of his prominent Hispanic features and was told to leave our country, that he was invading our country. I've also been to Iowa, where Joe, Henry, and I went and met with the federal attorney, advocating for a 14-year-old girl with prominent Hispanic features who was run over on purpose because she was Hispanic. So we've seen so much social injustice happening throughout the country, and that was even before the pandemic. And now on the nightly news each night, we as a nation continue to see this tragedy that's been occurring right before our very eyes. We only need to remember Logansport, Indiana here, where a month ago, after a test was done, 1,000 plus Tyson workers at their plant in Logansport, Indiana, were laboratory certified to have COVID-19. And here just a short time ago, there was a very special memorial that was held in Greeley, Colorado, where the entire community came together to remember the six meat plant workers whose lives were lost to COVID. And we've seen this play out time and time again across the country. And once again, we're talking months after the guidance was first issued by the CDC. This really is a question of civil rights, of human dignity, and basic workforce protections. And that's why For Latino, with all of our coalition partners, have really made this a key priority, giving voice to those who for some reason continue to go unheard. So as we jump into a CDC report, this just came out last week. So this is nonpartisan information. This is not information that was gathered by For Latino or any of our coalition partners. This is straight from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, and you can go online and download it as well. In fact, if you go to your handouts button in your webcast viewer control panel, you'll be able to download it there. So first off, we'll be sharing information from 23 states that elected to share their information with the CDC. And their report from the CDC goes through May 31st. So there's much more confirmed cases and deaths, tragically. But once again, we want to keep this on the CDC information. So as of May 31st, there were 16,233 laboratory confirmed cases of COVID-19. This wasn't a doctor just saying, I think you have COVID. No, they had the blood diagnostic work done, and they were diagnosed with COVID-19. Of that, at that time, we'd seen 86 deaths. Once again, with no presumption that they passed due to complications of COVID-19, it was verified that they were. And the states that elected to participate are listed there below. Joe, you had noticed, or you had mentioned that there is a state there that you're more than familiar with that chose not to share their data. You
Yes,
care to share that with us?
yes, Daryl. Iowa has not provided information to the CDC, and as a matter of fact, is not provided information through its state health department. Through newspaper reports, research through the Midwest Center for Investigative Reporting, there are now 26,500 reported cases gathered through newspaper reports across the country. But Iowa, of course, has had nearly almost a dozen cases of deaths. Another one is going to be reported locally shortly. But also the total report of deaths gathered by the Midwest Center for Investigative Reporting based on newspaper articles beyond the CDC is up to 134 deaths that have occurred to date. So Iowa has not been doing this reporting to the CDC, as have a number of other states. So thank you for bringing that up.
This is truly tragic, and think about the lives in the other states that aren't listed here. Once again, all work is honorable, all work is dignified, and these workers, and let me restate that, these essential workers, these heroes that are keeping our families fed, deserve every workplace protection that we can provide them. It really is a crisis of conscience, it's immoral, and it should be illegal. Once again, this is following months of guidance that had been issued by the CDC, but has not been fully acted upon by the mega meat processors around the country. As of May 31st, 2020, once again, this is of the 21 states in this instance on a limited basis that provided demographic information as to who was being infected with COVID-19. Once again, here we see the injustice that's being perpetrated right now on these essential workers. 80% of those with laboratory confirmed cases of COVID-19 were racial or ethnic minorities, with Hispanics leading the way with 56%, 19% of non-Hispanic Black, 13% non-Hispanic White, and 12% Asian. So we must stop and think, at what point does this become discrimination in the workplace? Joe, I know you have as well. I've toured numerous meat processing plants, and every time I go on a tour, I hear from the representative of the company leading the tour how proud they are and how innovative they are to make sure that they waste no part of any animal that they purchase for processing. They make sure every ounce turns into financial compensation for the company. And one must wonder, why aren't they able to use that same level of vigor and innovation to protect these workers working hard in these plants, trying to provide for their families, keeping us fed? There is no excuse as to why they should be exposed to this kind of proven harm and danger.
Yes, clearly, Daryl. I mean, what is happening is profits are being placed in front of the safety of the workers. There is no social distancing, no mandatory testing. Workers do not know who's infected next to them. Workers have not been given clarity on whether or not they have paid full sick leave. They're not even sure what type of healthcare coverage. But without mandatory testing, without social distancing, everything else that these companies are providing are merely window dressing, only to satisfy a PR campaign. But workers are continue to be infected, they're continue to die.
So true, Joe, so true. And the CDC came out with the main components or variables as to which together create the factor for exposure risk. And the most important, and they state this, the most important one is the distance between workers. Even though they give suggestions on the use of barriers between workers, etc., they are clearly state that those barriers do not replace the distance. Those barriers should be there to help enforce the distance that should be occurring between workers. They also talk to the duration of contact, and we all know that in these plants, it's not uncommon for these workers to be working 10 to 14 hour shift. And then there's the type of contact, working in close proximity, people lifting heavy weight, breathing heavy, coughing, sneezing, touching everything from time clocks to butcher utensils, etc. Providing that opportunity for spread. And then again, there's the issue of shared transportation that exists in a lot of the communities that have these meat processing plants. Once again, we're listing all the sources for this information on each slide, and we'll be making it available on our website at forlatino.org, as well as on our Facebook page as well. Here are the recommended interventions that the CDC is recommending. A minimum of 6 feet of separation between workers. And while you may see plexiglass, or you may see other types of barriers there, they should be, as I mentioned before, placed there to enforce that separation. They also do, and we should have added it on the side, they also call for reduced line speed. So that the workers can be properly distanced, etc. They call for increased cleaning and sanitation, for adequate ventilation. We need to make sure that even for those who now are given the PPE, especially in the summer months, that there's adequate ventilation provided, that there be worker screening prior to entering a facility. Promoting proper hygiene, providing masks and education and training. And I bring these up because the report goes into how much of these have been implemented at the plants nationwide. So the CDC, on the surveys that they received back, concluded this, that only about 80% of the workers in the meat and poultry plants are actually being screened prior to going in. And typically for most, that just means a skin temperature test before they walk in. Only 77% are requiring face coverings. Only 65% are providing increased access to hand hygiene stations. Only 63% have any kind of training on the threat that COVID poses to them. 62% have installed physical barriers, but once again, we are not seeing the social distancing being enforced by those physical barriers. It's almost as if they believe it replaces the 6 foot requirement, which the CDC clearly says it doesn't. Only 37% have offered testing. And I must say, of the plants I visited here in Wisconsin, Joe, that's it, for the most part, it's been single instance testing. And when you're working in the environments these workers are working in, they need to be tested frequently. It's not a one and done. They need to be tested frequently.
Daryl, it is important to note, I'm glad you brought that up. Mandatory testing, at least monthly. And this testing, we would state, should be done through a public agency, not through a private firm. We know that Tyson has contracted with a group called Matrix to do this testing. But as far as we can tell, it is not reliable. It appears we have heard of workers who've been tested through the Tyson private contractor, have not received their results back. They end up going to the hospital after feeling sick, get tested again at the hospital, and then have positive, show positive for the virus. So this hit and miss type of private sector testing is not going to do it. It's not reliable. It needs to be done through the public sector, and it needs to be uniform, monthly basing, all infected workers. that information needs to be posted within the facilities so that workers know who else has been infected, so they too can get themselves tested in between the testing that would happen on a mandatory basis.
So true, Joe. And while some would give these meat plants the 22% that actually closed temporarily high marks for closing temporarily, from everything we have learned, it's been for a one-time deep cleaning. And once again, the very moment you have somebody else who's walked into the facility who's carrying the virus, whether it's being symptomatic or asymptomatic, all that kind of goes by the wayside. So there is just so much work that is yet to be done. One thing that we couldn't help but notice in the report was that zero of the meat and poultry plants that were surveyed reported implementing social distancing on their production line. Let me say that once again. The most important key factor: no, not one meat or poultry plant facility reported doing social distancing on their production line. Once again, here's a slide showing the demographic breakdown of those who are being infected. And we continue to receive many calls asking, well, where's OSHA? This is their job. And OSHA has gone ahead and encouraged people to follow the CDC guidelines, but has not, none of those have become enforceable regulations with regards to preventive measures. They have put some things in place where COVID, people who've been hospitalized for COVID, et cetera, need to be reported. But we can tell you that as of the end of May, of over 10,000 complaints that have been filed with OSHA, only one, as of May, the end of May, only one citation had been issued. And that was to a nursing home in Georgia, because they did not report that they had to take one of their residents to the hospital for COVID-19. So here we have an institution, OSHA, dedicated to protecting the worker, who still does not have somebody leading that agency since the current administration came into place. So it is rudderless and is not enforcing, or has not placed any enforceable regulations out there.
And Daryl, just to bring up too, one of the other things that has been brought up is to make it mandatory that every facility be inspected by an OSHA inspector on a regular basis within every state. That's a demand that needs to increase, and it needs to be happening across the country. Washington State is probably the only state that is beginning to work on some form of enforcement that other states have failed to do.
Wonderful point, Joe. Wonderful point. And if all this wasn't enough, about 3 hours ago, there was a GOP senator, Tom Tillis of North Carolina, a senator that represents a state with numerous slaughterhouses in his state, stated during an interview that he blames the actions of Hispanic people for the high rate of coronavirus. It is truly shameful. Fortunately, about an hour after he made these remarks, Dr. Anthony Fauci, who I think most people are familiar with, during a Facebook interview, replied when asked the question about minorities and COVID rates, and he stated that without overgeneralizing it, a large portion of the minority community is working in essential jobs and doesn't have the luxuries of so many of us to stay home during a shutdown. They are in essential jobs, working in our hospitals, working in our meatpacking facilities, keeping our store shelves stocked so we could care for our families. And I don't think anyone could have articulated that point better. So shame on the senator. We also had the same thing happen in Wisconsin here with the Speaker of the Assembly, Robin Voss. We've had issues with state Supreme Court justices making comments how they shouldn't take in to consideration the outbreaks around meat packing houses because they're not normal people. They don't represent normal people. Shame on each and every one of them. We need to remember every worker has the right to a safe work environment. And Joe, maybe you can tell us a little bit about the folks we see here, sadly, in the slide before us.
Okay, well, so we have two photos here. One on the right is a woman who comes from the Greeley, Colorado JBS facility, who in March fell ill and then ended up in the hospital. It is not sure whether or not she has survived, but she did find out, of course. After being ill, not knowing sure what was going on, she did finally get tested positive for the virus. Very, very unfortunate. This was at a JBS facility. On the left, these are workers who, this photo was taken in April at a facility here in Iowa. Social distancing was not practiced at that facility, nor has it even started at that facility. Workers are still shoulder to shoulder within inches of each other, going into the plant, in the locker rooms. Now there is some precautions in the break rooms, but again, not in the locker rooms, not on the shop floor. Thank you.
So Brent, I know we have a very special speaker joining us from Public Justice right now, who's going to talk about an action that we took along with a number of our coalition partners this last week. Would you care to introduce him for us?
Sure. So here we have attorney Brent Knoll. Brent is a food project senior attorney with Public Justice in Oakland, California, where he works with the food project team to reform the industrial animal agriculture system, support impacted communities, and promote sustainable alternatives. Prior to joining Public Justice in 2018, Brent was an attorney with the Center on Race, Poverty, and the Environment in Oakland, California. Brent brings 18 years of litigation and legislative experience on air quality, climate change, factory farm, environmental justice, and civil rights issues to the food project. So now we have Brent. Brent, thank you for coming on.
Thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with everyone here tonight. I would like to thank For Latino for hosting this, and to say that it's a privilege to represent For Latino, the Idaho Organization of Resource Councils, which is co-sponsoring this webinar, the Food Chain Workers Alliance, Heal Food Alliance, the Rural Community Workers Alliance, and the American Friends Service Committee, Iowa. I'm the lead attorney, and we have a fantastic legal team that are working with me, and it includes attorneys from a firm in Minnesota called Nichols Castor, and attorneys at a nonprofit law firm like Public Justice that's called Courts Justice, and they're based in Colorado. So what For Latino and the other organizations filed last week is called a Title VI Administrative Civil Rights Complaint. And it alleges that the meat processing corporations, JBS and Tyson, are engaging in systematic racial discrimination that's prohibited by Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. That legislation came about as a result of the civil rights movement and the systemic institutional racism and outright racism that was occurring in our country. There's a photograph that comes to my mind of Lyndon Johnson signing that law with Dr. Martin Luther King standing behind him and looking over his shoulder. Here we are in the year 2020, and there's still systemic institutional racism that's resulting in our country. It's become part of the national conversation and a national reckoning because of the murder of George Floyd in Minnesota. Even before George Floyd's murder, the systemic and institutional racism has been impacting meat processing workers. So very briefly, Title VI of the Civil Rights Act prohibits any person from discriminating on the basis of race, and it applies specifically to any person, including corporations, that receive federal financial assistance. JBS and Tyson have received hundreds of millions of dollars worth of federal contracts. In 2020 alone, Tyson has received over $109 million in federal Farm Bill nutrition contracts and trade mitigation program contracts. Also in 2020, JBS has received over $45 million in Farm Bill nutrition program contracts and trade mitigation program contracts. Many of these contracts are specifically associated with plants that are having significant outbreaks of COVID-19. The complaint alleges that JBS and Tyson have adopted policies that reject the CDC guidelines that are designed to prevent the spread of COVID-19. In particular, their policies are rejecting social distancing among workers on meat processing lines, which subjects them to greater risk of contracting COVID-19. As Carroll was mentioning, the majority of meat processing plant workers are Black, Latino, and Asian. One form of prohibited discrimination under Title VI is discrimination it's when a policy has a discriminatory effect. And this discriminatory effect is triggered by a legal standard known as the disparate impact standard. Because of Tyson and JBS's policies, Black, Latino, and Asian workers are at a greater risk of contracting COVID-19 than their white coworkers. They're also at a greater risk of contracting COVID-19 than majority white management. As Carroll was discussing, the CDC report, which came out on July 7th, corroborates the allegations in the complaint. The CDC report found that Latino and Asian workers may have experienced a disparate adverse impact. Now, it's important to note the CDC report is based on extremely limited data because states like Iowa, North Carolina, Minnesota, Indiana, Texas, Oklahoma, Arkansas all failed to report data. But we know that on an industry-wide basis, the majority of workers are people of color, and the majority of workers that are becoming sick from COVID-19 and dying from COVID-19 are people of color. The complaint, therefore, alleges a violation of Title VI. It's important to note that Congress directed the U.S. Department of Agriculture to prevent racial discrimination in its programs where it provides federal financial assistance. In this situation, the USDA is providing federal financial assistance to Tyson and JBS, and it has the obligation under the laws in this country to prevent that racial discrimination. The complaint is therefore filed with the USDA. The complaint requests relief, including the suspension of all federal financial assistance to Tyson and JBS, and to refer the complaint to the United States Department of Justice to take all action that's authorized by law. And thank you very much, Daryl and Joe, for your tireless service to protect Latino workers, Black workers, and Asian workers in the meat processing plants.
Thank you, Brent. Thank you very much.
So as we mentioned, For Latino is really committed to making sure that every worker has the protections that they have the right to expect. So if you've fallen ill due to COVID-19, or if you've suffered any other kind of injury in the workplace, or if you believe that or are unsure if your workplace is following CDC guidelines, or if you would like to file a complaint, please feel free to visit www.forwardlatino.org .gov/workplace-safety. And here you'll be able to fill out a small electronic form with your name, phone number, address, the complaint that you have. You can upload any photographs or videos that you may have taken. If there is a witness who can corroborate, have their information placed in there as well. And as soon as you get it to us, we will have our attorneys take a quick peek at it as well to see how we may be able to assist you. I want to talk a little bit, Joe, about the action items. It's one thing to sit here tonight and to learn about the injustice being done, but I know people watching want to know what they can do, right, to help right this wrong and to make sure that every worker receives the same protections, regardless if they work in the C-suite or in a meat packing plant. Everyone deserves the right, the protection to safety and to human dignity. So right now, there is, it passed in the House and is sitting in the Senate, the COVID-19 Every Worker Protection Act of 2020. The bill would require the creation of an emergency temporary occupational health standard that would be enforceable by OSHA. We spoke earlier today how OSHA right now hasn't put forth any enforceable regulations. They're simply recommending that people follow the CDC guidelines, and after reviewing the data, I'm sure we can agree that's not nearly enough. So we're asking people to reach out to their state senators, both. It's not enough to call one. You need to call both and tell them that they need to be supporting the COVID-19 Every Worker Protection Act of 2020. It's Bill S3677. And we also invite people to join us in our Boycott Big Meat campaign. Joe, can you enlighten people to a little bit about the campaign?
Yep, we actually have two flanks to this campaign. We have the Boycott Big Meat, boycottbigmeat.org. That campaign is composed of us within the Latino community, farmers, social justice activists, and elected leaders. So what the campaign is stating is, please do not purchase corporate processed meat or beef, pork, and poultry. Go to your local meat lockers, and then you can buy your meat there. Now I see Mike online, so I know that he's going to be talking a lot about this. So okay, let me introduce Mike. Mike Carberry is the National Campaign Director for the Organic Consumers Association. Born in Wisconsin, raised in Iowa in a small farm town, the son of a large animal veterinarian, he has been interested in food and farming all his life. He started working professionally on agriculture, energy, and climate policy in the year 2000. Mike started his own policy and advocacy firm known as Green State Solutions in 2005. He has served as a county supervisor here in Iowa from 2014 to 2018. He has dedicated his life to fighting for justice of all kinds, including food, farmers, and worker justice. Thank you, Mike, for coming on. It's all yours.
Well, thank you, Joe. And it's just an honor for me to be on here this evening. And I want to thank Joe for really getting me and getting us into this fight. It was probably in middle of April when Joe reached out to me and to some other activists in Iowa that were fighting factory farms and asked us if we were interested in a Meatless May campaign. And what I said to Joe at the time is said, well, we represent farmers who do what was called regenerative agriculture, which is getting animals out of those factory farms and putting them back onto pasture, the way that we used to farm in this country. And Joe liked that idea. And so one of the things we did is that we took the ball and ran with it, and we created this Boycott Big Meat campaign, which we just launched about 24 hours ago with 60 national and state organizations. It started in Iowa. 22 of those 60 organizations are Iowa-based. One of the reasons we did that is Iowa is the pork belly of the beast, if you will, when it comes to factory farms and slaughterhouses. Iowa is #1 in the country with over 25 million hogs. No other state has more than 10. We are also #1 in eggs. So if you're #1 in eggs, you're #1 in chickens that lay the eggs, and you're also #1 in chicken crap. So we have a real issue in Iowa with factory farms, but we have a real issue in Iowa and the upper Midwest with these slaughterhouses. And what happened with this coronavirus pandemic really exposed our whole meat system and our whole food system as being completely broken. Our food chains are way too long, supply chains. We can't feed ourselves, get all of our food from about 1,500 miles away or even longer. And so we created this campaign to really address the issues both in the slaughterhouse industry and also in the factory farm industry, because they're so related. I mean, the factory farms are the suppliers for all the meat that's being butchered in the slaughterhouses in those oppressive conditions. So we created this campaign, and it's really 2 parts. One of them is an educational component where we teach people about this corporate meat and about the Tysons and the Smithfields and the JBSs and the Cargills that control over 80% of the meat industry in this country. And that we also then talk to them about where their food comes from. Most people just think it comes from the grocery store. They just have no idea what kind of conditions that it takes to raise this meat and poultry, and also how to process it in these slaughterhouses. And so the educational component to this campaign, this Boycott Big Meat campaign, is essential that we talk to people about where their meat comes from, and how it's processed and how it's raised, the environmental conditions, the worker conditions. I mean, the factory farm industry also has a lot of immigrant labor in it, especially in dairy and in poultry. It's very labor intensive, and a lot of those workers are also persons of color. A lot of them are undocumented as well, but they're considered essential workers. And other people would say they're illegal. Well, how can someone be illegal and essential at the same time, Joe or Daryl? I don't understand that. So we are just very happy to get this campaign off the ground. The first part is this education. We want to let people know where their meat comes from in poultry, how to identify it. One thing, if you're eating at a fast food restaurant, all of the food there, all of the meat and poultry is coming from a factory farm. As a matter of fact, 95% of our meat, dairy, and eggs in this country come from factory farms. That's pretty appalling. It's loaded with hormones. It's nutritionally devoid of of the nutrients that really good meat and poultry has. And it's also a flavor. And also the thing about the factory farms is they talk about efficiency, and the bigger the better. Well, we've seen in this country that the bigger isn't always better. And what is the high cost of cheap food and the high cost of cheap meat? This is what we're talking about here. So knowing not to eat fast food, and then knowing where your food comes from, how to identify good meat and poultry in a grocery store, looking for things on the label like grass-fed and maybe cage-free or maybe pasture-raised. Those certain things that we will teach people how to identify what big meat is and what we call small meat. And small meat is that pasture-raised meat that's fed good, nutritious feed and pasture forage, and then they can identify that at the store. But also, one of our biggest parts of this educational campaign is a Know Your Farmer campaign. So if people actually know where their meat and poultry was raised, they have a good idea of how it was raised. And so there's a lot of programs out there. We have one of them at boycottbigmeat.org that is a farmer finder program. You actually put your address into it, and you'll be able to find local farmers where you can buy meat, eggs, pork, lamb, you name it, any kind of farm produce. You should be able to find it. Also, and so you can find that at our website. You can also then, if that doesn't work for you, you can always use a search engine like Google or something like that, because you just type in local farmers or local beef or local pork, you'll find places to buy, you'll find farmers to buy, and you'll actually be able to go out to their farm and see how the things were raised. So the educational component is huge on this campaign. The second part of the campaign is going to be legislative. We really need legislation on the local, state, and federal level to move the ball forward, to make it easier for farmers to raise meat and poultry like this, because right now we give federal subsidies to the factory farms. And so they always say, you can tell me what your values are, but I say, let me take a look at your budget and I'll tell you what your values are. And so our values and our budget in the food system is the Farm Bill. And so what we have to do is we look in the Farm Bill and we see all these subsidies for factory farms. What we need to subsidizing is a better kind of meat. And so we are working on the Farm System Reform Act, which was introduced in the Senate by Cory Booker and in the House by Ro Khanna. And we're working on that bill. We're going to be working with For Latino and all of our other partners on your COVID-19 Every Worker Protection Act of 2020. Plus, we need other pieces of legislation that will make a better food system. So those are the two main components of the campaign. We're very excited and honored to work with For Latino. It was nice to meet Brent. I went onto your website today, and I was very impressed with the work that your nonprofit law firm is doing. And I'm just very honored to be here, very honored to work with this organization, because this food fight, if I will call it that, is a justice issue of every kind. It's food justice, but it's worker justice, it's environmental justice, it's racial justice, it's social justice, and it's economic justice. If there's a justice fight out there, it's incorporated in this fight right here. And I couldn't be prouder to stand in solidarity with all the people in this campaign, and I'm glad to be here this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much. Well, now I'm going to hand it over to Daryl for questions and answers. Daryl?
Yeah, so each one of you should see a little tab there in your webcast control bar that says questions on it. So you can go ahead and click on there and type in any questions you may have, and we'll try to get one of our expert panelists to go ahead and answer that for you. I just wanted to follow up and thank Mike once again for all of his work and his efforts and his remarks this evening. And while he reviewed the issues of nutrition and the issues of these large corporate subsidies these companies are getting, we also know that there's environmental issues there as well, that these factory farms seem to get waivers and exceptions to important environmental regulation that keeps our groundwater safe, that keeps pesticides from getting onto our foods, and really not only creating health issues which add cost to our healthcare system, but costs us in the quality of the nutrition that's actually delivered through the meat or through the produce. So very, very important issues there. So thank you so much, Mike, for sharing that. I also wanted to let you know that you should see a little button for handouts. And if you click on that, you'll be able to download, by clicking on it, the CDC updated meat and poultry report, the full document right there. So you can review it and you can share that with both senators from your state when you call them and you demand action on these very important issues. So that being said, I'm going into questions. Boy, all of our presenters must have done an exceptional job tonight. I'm not seeing any there. Oh, I do see one here. How do we continue to support our Latino grocers and taco trucks, stressing that they purchase their supplies from Big Meat? Joe or Mike, do you want to go ahead and tackle that one?
Well, at least you're buying local. So the money is staying, and we've got a local butcher shop that just opened 4 blocks from my house. And I went in there and asked them if they had any grass-fed or pasture-raised meat or poultry. They said, no, but we're buying local. And I said, well, that's better than not buying local. So this whole process is, it's going to be incremental. It's going to be a transition. So we're not going to get, with 95% of the meat, dairy, and eggs in this country coming from factory farms and from the large slaughterhouses, we're not going to get anywhere fast. It's going to be a slow transition, but it has to be a just transition. So if you're at a taco truck, you might ask the purveyor, so why don't you look into sourcing from a local farmer that may be grass-fed beef or pasture-raised pork, and see what they say. And maybe they can check into it. And maybe then they can look into it. And so maybe next year, when you go to the same taco truck, you might find that they're having a different kind of meat there. So it's not going to happen fast. And so we just have to be patient, but we have to be persistent.
Mike, excellent answer. I can share with you that I walked up to the manager of our local grocer and told them that we would no longer be purchasing products from these factory manufacturers, and that we went online to find a local farmer who sells grass-fed beef. And I told him he'd be welcome to my business once again once they started bringing that in. And he asked me to jot it down so he could forward it up to management, so I did. So it starts one voice at a time. But if no voices are raised, then that's when all progress will cease. So.
Yes, and I would also, when you go to a restaurant, I avoid chain restaurants, and so I go to restaurants that I know that they source locally. And if you don't know that, you should ask. When you get to the restaurant, ask your waiter, if it's not on the menu, ask them how they source their meat and their dairy and their poultry and those sorts of things. And if they don't know, ask them to bring out the manager or maybe the chef. And so if we keep asking for this better meat that's raised much more holistically and healthy, then maybe we'll get it. You never get anything that you don't ask for. So we need to start asking for a better meat that's raised and produced and slaughtered in a much more humane fashion that doesn't treat their workers like they're slaves.
And Mike, can you share, we got another question here. Can you share one more time a website or a search that people can do to find those local sources of people who are growing produce, who are raising animals that are organic, that do have high nutrition value and don't pose a safety risk?
Absolutely. We have a map on our website for Boycott Big Meat that is called a Regeneration Map. It's regenerative agriculture, which is the new term that we use. We used to call it sustainable agriculture. But it's if you just go to www.boycottbigmeat.org, you'll find a link on that on the first page of that website to the Regeneration Farmer Map.
Wonderful, and thank you. And Brent, would you mind sharing with people the website people can go to if they want to learn more about public justice?
Excellent. Yes. Please go to publicjustice.net, and within that site you can navigate through our various programs, including the Food Project, which is the team I work with. So thank you very much, Daryl, Joe, Mike, Eileen. It's been a pleasure.
The pleasure's been all ours. And once again, I ask everyone to consider supporting all these organizations. There's a lot of fine work taking place right now. And unfortunately, despite the best wishes and the hard work of everyone, it doesn't come at no cost. So we really do appreciate any support you can offer. Joe, do you want to go ahead and close us up and carry us home?
Yes, thank you all for coming on. This will be recorded. This has been recorded. This is going to go back online probably first thing tomorrow. This is very important information, something that we have not really had out there. Clearly, with the audience that we're sending this out to, is quite a few people within the Latino community, animal rights community, social justice, farmers, across the country. So we're going to share this on a lot of different platforms. Very good discussion. This is a long fight, as it has been indicated by the speakers. And again, thank you all. Thank you For Latino. Thank you, Brent. Thank you all for everything that you've said. Mike, thank you. So stay tuned.